Morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Plummer. I'm the director of the Environmental Sustainability Research Center, where I'm also professor. I'd like to welcome you all this morning to our panel on green infrastructure and low impact development. And I'd like to start with land acknowledgement. And at the end of the land acknowledgement, I'd ask that you just take a minute or two to really reflect upon its meaning. So we begin this gathering by acknowledging the land on which we gather is a traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples. Thank you for taking that moment of reflection. As I mentioned, I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you this morning and to have the opportunity to moderate this exciting panel. I, as a moderator, get to offer a few opening remarks. And I think for this panel, the most important thing to do is to share a little bit about the genesis of how it came to be. And there's really a twofold impetus for today's panel. At the ESRC, we're a center about sustainability science, and that means that we have partnerships where we bridge academia with all types of different society partners. And in our partnerships, we started to find we were using terms like green infrastructure and low impact development in different ways with different partners, and yet we meant really different things. And so in our one partnership, our charter agreement with facilities management, I talked to Mary and Amanda, and they were really excited about green infrastructure and low impact development. And in another partnership with the town of Lincoln and with Vineland Research and Innovation Center, I was talking about work we were doing. And again, we thought, wow, I don't think we're really talking about the same thing. And so the idea that we're using similar terms to mean very different things was not lost on us from a partnership perspective. So that's one genesis for today. The other is our transdisciplinary seminar series. And part of our audience today comes from our partners, but the other part of our audience is from our SAS 5P04 transdisciplinary seminar and our students and Dr. Marilyn Jolino, who instructs that course. And there we emphasize the need to think in different ways and to engage in transdisciplinary work. And we thought, what a great opportunity to bring these needs for using terms differently and have some reflections and some knowledge sharing about how these disciplines might come together. And so from those conversations, we thought, well, the best way to do this would be to have a panel where we reach out and find absolutely fascinating professionals that bring this rich experience and knowledge base and share that with all of us. And we can have some dialogue and questions. And so that's really what our panel is all about today. So with that said, let me introduce you to our panelists who we're privileged to have with us. And then I'll say a few words about the format and we'll get started. So first of all, I want to introduce Safdar Abidi, who's a principal practice leader at Perkins & Will. Safdar is an architect. He specializes in the design of higher education environments and leads Perkin and Will's higher education practice in Canada. He is passionate about the evolution within the post-secondary sector, in pedagogy, in research, in the role universities within society, and in future higher education, Safdar works closely with university and college leaders to develop strategic goals for building projects. He pushes the limits of aspirational goals and works to inspire stakeholders to imagine future-focused rather than status quo scenarios for environments. And prior to our call, Safdar and I had a wonderful exchange and conversation about how some of this new imagination is actually playing out at Brock and some of his work. And so we certainly welcome him to our panel today. Our next guest is Dr. Janani Sivarajah. Janani is a postdoctoral fellow at the Environmental Sustainability Research Center right here at Brock, and also the Vineland Research and Innovation Center. Janani is an urban forestry and greening researcher, educator, and consultant. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the ESRC and at Vineland Research and Innovation Center. Her transdisciplinary research explores the ecosystem services of urban trees and public green spaces and finds greening solutions to improve social ecological resilience of cities. She is particularly interested in building multifunctional landscapes and proposing nature-based solutions to global environmental challenges. Her work has found direct and relevant applications in both public health and environmental fields. In addition to all of that, she's a registered professional forester in training, the president of the Ontario Urban Forest Council, and member of the Toronto Cancer Prevention Coalition Shade Policy Committee. She enjoys public engagement, science communication, and hiking through the woods. And I have to personally say, since I have the privilege of supervising Janani at the center, just what a joy she is to work with. And she's also very modest. What she didn't bother to put in her bio, and of course I know this, so I can speak to it, is she also holds a prestigious MyTax fellowship, and you know, certainly has done an amazing job of onboarding to join our center during a very challenging time at COVID. And she also has another presentation coming up tomorrow, which apparently has gone extremely viral. And I have no idea what that means because I'm old and not into social media, but I trust her on it. Welcome, Janani. Last but not least, I want to welcome Paul Lietch. Paul is a director, Environmental Sustainability Services at Blackstone Energy. Paul is a mechanical engineer, has extensive experience in energy efficiency and renewable energy strategies, policy, development, and implementation, spanning 4 decades. As Director, Environmental Sustainability at Blackstone Energy Solutions, he's responsible for the strategic planning, development, and delivery of greenhouse gas and energy roadmaps and action plans. He focuses on encouraging people to adopt sustainable operation and growth in their business and lives, loves sailing, music, and a good book. Welcome, Paul. It's wonderful to have you. And hopefully you can draw upon some sailing analogies, reading good books, along with your experience. So those are our panelists today. We're extremely privileged to have an amazing panel with us. In terms of our format, I'm going to pose some questions to our panelists. I'm going to ask that in response to each, they keep their answers to about 3 minutes. If my math is correct, that'll take us to about 3/4 of our 1 hour together. As we go, please, audience members, feel free to type questions you have for one or all of our panelists into the chat box. Our own amazing Amanda Smits is behind the scenes running 3 to 5 computers at any time. She's magically keeping track of these questions, and we will be able to pose your questions to our panel at their near the end. And so with that, I want to get started. And I think, you know, our first question that I would like our panelists to reflect on really goes to the framing of how we arrived at this panel today. And, you know, that is low impact development and sustainability mean very, very different things to different people and in different sectors. And so I'd love to hear some initial reflections on what low impact development and sustainability mean to each of our panelists. And Janani, maybe I can ask you to kick us off.
Thank you, Ryan, for that wonderful introduction. In terms of sustainability, the way it means to me is I always think about green infrastructure. So green infrastructure can mean very, very different things. And in terms of a paper by Tenley Conway and colleagues actually goes into defining this green infrastructure. So many of us think of green infrastructure as living amenities, like so trees, shrubs, grasses, and we tend to use these living infrastructure to build catchment ponds, stormwater basins, and other sort of infrastructure to make sure we reduce the infiltration of water. So a lot of it is we think about that in terms of low impact development, but in terms of sustainability, we have so many of the other components in place. So are we building cities that are good for people, for their well-being, or are we building cities for making sure that it's ecologically very sustained over time for many more years to come? So there are so many different facets to sustainability. So I approach it from a green infrastructure and urban forestry professional. So a lot of my work goes into like the transdisciplinary nature of sustainability, making sure we're building very, very strong foundational cities, either at the ecological level or the environmental level, and making sure there is a social concept to some of the way that we build our cities. So to me, sustainability really is about making sure that it's socially resilient, ecologically resilient, and also economically resilient as well. So there's these 3 pillars that we think of when we are thinking about sustainability. So all of this do go into some of the work that I'm currently doing. And when we think about low impact development, traditionally we always thought about this as stormwater management infrastructure. So when I think about low impact development, I want to make sure it's low impact for the people, but also for the wildlife and animals that are residing with us along in urban ecosystems. So these are a couple of things that I think of when I think of sustainability and low impact development. I'm sure Safdar and Paul have other ways of thinking about their sustainability and low impact development. It will be great to hear what they are saying.
Paul, why don't you go next and tell us your take on these terms?
Thank you very much, Ryan, for the introduction, and for Brock for hosting this. This is fantastic. Hello to my fellow panelists. Good morning, and also to the attendees. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is important stuff, and but that answer to that question, my joke about that is you ask 3 people that question, you'll get 4 answers. And the truth is that it's where I'm going to be going today in the next 2 minutes and 45 seconds, I hope, addressing the operationalizing, or if you will, implementing. How do we get this to actually stick and take place? LID, if you don't mind me putting it that way, and sustainability there have many moving parts, and Janani mentioned some of them. And ultimately, they're goals and results-oriented processes. We want something to be that we can look back in the future and say we did the right thing to get to where we are today. So for my take on now sustainability is we're looking for the results now. And in order to do that, it's really important to have a plan, a path, if you will. My first sailing analogy will be, if you're going to go into a race, you want to know where you're going. And it's very similar here. You have to know where the wind is coming from. You have to know where the issues are. So, but you also have to know who your team is. So there's goals and targets. You have to understand that. You have to have a good solid database. Where are your numbers? Where's the baseline? What are the key performance indicators that you want to pursue and follow? And are you doing better than you were? Are you doing, getting close to where you want to be? Considering things like life cycle cost versus first cost. Most of our construction these days, and I'm sure Safdar is familiar with this, is a first cost relationship. We want to think about a net zero policies, but we have to think about the future, not the today. So that's my take on this. As LID and green infrastructures processes are more accepted, then this will become more the norm, if you will, and they will say, well, of course you think like that. So that's kind of way my understanding is. Now, sustainability has been around for a long time. It's time now, in my mind, to say, yeah, sustainability, well, of course. So I think that the sustainability initiatives that we're talking about is a paradigm, and Perkins and Wills knows this very well, is to get it to so that everybody thinks about it, get a plan together, get the data properly aligned, get the reliability of the data, believe it, and get the people involved that you want to have involved. So you got to come from the top as well as the bottom, if you will, and make sure everybody's on board. And let's make this normal. That's my take on sustainability. Thank you.
Paul, I think that would be a great slogan for a t-shirt. Let's make this normal. Safdar, please go ahead.
Ryan, thank you very much for your very gracious introduction. I want to thank Brock University for inviting us to share ideas with you. It's an honor and privilege to be speaking to you this morning. I would actually like to begin with a provocation on this issue and build on the land acknowledgement that Ryan started with. If we think about symbiotic existence of people with planet, animals, and plants, the First Nations community has been living on this land for 5,000 years and did not do as much damage as we have done in the last 200 years to the planet. So for the students that we're speaking to, I'd like to provoke you to challenge your learning and start exploring what is a huge reservoir of knowledge residing in Indigenous traditions, culture, and ways of existing with nature without harming it. So let's start opening up that door of knowledge in this discussion. Building on the idea of low impact development and sustainability being really a holistic and symbiotic system of interconnected ways, I think you're absolutely right, Ryan, in saying that this idea can mean many different things to many different people. But I think, to build on Paul's point, we actually need to make it mean the same thing to everyone. That's where we need to be. There shouldn't be any ambiguity about what needs to be done at this stage in the world. So at Perkins & Will, in an attempt to encapsulate that way of multiple influences, we've come up with a platform called Living Design, which is the basis of our approach to designing all aspects of our practice: buildings, landscapes, interiors, urban systems. Everything we design needs to fall under living design. And it has 5 interconnected elements that we believe are essential to looking at design as a holistic living system. The first one is inclusion, which talks about how can a system integrate diverse populations, ensuring all human, plant, and animal life is treated in a fair and equitable way. The second one is resilience, which asks the question, how can a system adapt to shocks, flexing in the face of sudden change and withstanding unexpected challenges? Third one is sustainability. How can a system endure, maintaining its performance over time and achieving its fullest potential? The fourth one is regeneration. How can a system replenish its own life sources, renewing and refreshing itself, or restoring itself over time? And the last one is well-being. How can a system thrive inside and out, allowing life to prosper holistically? So that's where I'll end my opinion on this matter.
Thank you all so much for sharing with us, you know, your thoughts, and really I like that provocative way of challenging your fellow panelists as well as all of our audience members. I want to share with you that, you know, we have over 30 people in our audience today that have tuned in, including faculty, staff, students, partners, professionals across the region and beyond. One of the wonderful parts about being able to do such seminars virtually is we can draw on a much broader audience. So welcome everyone in the audience. And I'd like to have our second question and build on kind of this line of thinking about the meanings that we bring, draw on, or reflect on your extensive decades of professional experience in these areas. And Safdar, you mentioned how, you know, we can bring some of these things together. And also, you know, Paul, I want to pick up on your comments about making it normal. And so, you know, the second question then that I'd pose to our panelists is, what do you perceive to be the biggest challenge in implementing green infrastructure and low impact development? And how do we overcome it? And Paul, since you've, you know, started the new T-shirt craze on Let's Make It Normal, I'm gonna put you on the hot seat on this one to start us off, and would love to know, you know, for you, what are you thinking are the biggest challenges, and how do we overcome them to make it normal?
Well, we first have to get a good sustainable T-shirt supplier. I think that's probably number one. And then, but all jokes aside, I did make a few notes about this because it's something I think about going out. I'm sure we all do. We're trying to. We live this kind of thinking, and the difficulty is it kind of understanding why other people don't understand what we're trying to say, and we've all been in this for a long time. So my feelings are, I guess, for the most part, I think one of the biggest speed bumps is the fact that so many facilities and portfolios or individual buildings or even your own house, there's conflicting priorities. And you know, I've got a leaky basement, or I've got, you know, cost or something's obviously getting in the way of making this part of the normal consideration. So that's the first thing is the prioritization of what you're trying to do. We all call this about integration. If we integrate this thinking, they are all related and they can be addressed together. I think that's the normal aspect of my comment and T-shirt. The other part is a lot of people are hamstrung right now with resources. I think it's already been mentioned a couple of times, the transdisciplinary nature of this, the fact that it's not that much regular, it's not really regular yet, so that people and organizations don't necessarily have the resources internally to be able to expand into this thinking process. It's fairly new in some people's minds. So there's a couple of things we have to do. We have to convince them that this is a great idea, and also convince them that by integrating this thinking, by doing this low impact design integration, the trickle down, the benefits will multiply, and actually you get 1 and 1 makes 3 for a lot of the savings opportunities and the benefits. So yeah, so that's the part is, and the third element, I suppose, and not that this is always an issue, but can be, is it has to be bought into by everybody effectively. I call it from the boiler room to the boardroom. And that's, to me, is critical, because the best laid plans of whatever Shakespeare said can go awry if somebody or some people decide, I don't care about this stuff. And before you know it, the best building automation system in the world is not doing its job. So those are the 3 elements I think that matter. Other than that, ultimately with students such as yours at Brock and everywhere else, that they will bring forward this the normalcy of this because it'll be part of their training.
Thanks so much, Paul. Safdar, I want to go to you next because I'm thinking back to the conversation that you and I were having about some of the challenges at our own institution, and you bring this wealth of experience across different higher education institutions perspective to us today. So from that, what are some of the big challenges that you're seeing, and how do we overcome them? How do we address them?
So Ryan, it's interesting that the state of kind of climate degradation we're in today is a result of human activity. And when you ask the question, what are the biggest obstacles looking forward to implementing low impact developments, it's human beings again. They are the obstacle. And what I mean by that is the biggest problem we have right now with us as a human community being able to commit to what needs to be done, subjectivity is the biggest problem. So as long as we think that what needs to be done is an optional choice as opposed to an essential thing, we will remain in this world of climate change being politicized, climate change being questioned, climate deniers existing. So subjectivity of human beings is the first step. And the other step is human resistance to change. Human beings don't want to change. And so as long as we keep thinking that the climate is kind of an optional thing, we will not push ourselves to change. And to build on the point that Paul raised, because I work with campus communities many times, that when you introduce the idea of a rainwater collection cistern in a building as a conservation measure, and with all sympathy to operations and maintenance people who turn around and say, I don't like rainwater systems because it requires treatment, it's a pain in my life, I don't want to do it. Well, that needs to shift. And yes, they may not have enough resources to do what needs to be done, but the kind of boiler to the board thing, it needs to be firstly a non-binary, a sort of binary commitment that everything each of us can do in our daily lives to take this essential mandate forward, we need to do. We are also empowered as human beings in each of our lives to be able to contribute to what needs to be done. And that commitment needs to reside through, for instance, in the case of Brock, every member of Brock and every student needs to be part of that. So we need to overcome the myth that climate change is a subjective thing, and we need to commit to the change as we as human beings need to make to do what's necessary. And after that, all the pragmatic issues of funding, allocation of resources, policies, governmental commitment, municipal commitment, all of that can fall into place if we overcome the first two obstacles.
Safdar, thank you. I see a lot of nodding of heads on our panel here, and I'm sure also in our audience. Janani, I'm really intrigued about hearing your thoughts on this because you wear so many different hats. I mean, I was looking at the list and I thought I knew you well from all of our interactions, but I mean, this list of your experiences and the roles you play is longer than I even knew about on your CV. So, I mean, you're a registered professional forester in training, you're the president of the Ontario Urban Forest Council, you're involved with Cancer Prevention Coalition. I mean, the list, and on top of all that, in your spare time, you hold the My Tax Fellowship, you're a scientist and an accomplished academic. So what are your thoughts about this? I mean, from all those different hats that you wear, what do you think?
So I'm going to build on what Safdar said. So he really nailed the piece on talking about human behavior. And human behavior is human psychology is one of the most obstacles in achieving our goals in low impact development. And what I might dive in here is about the pragmatic issues that he sort of put it together and grouped it under. But what are these pragmatic issues and what are some of the solutions behind it? So I'm going to tackle this question. as an academic, but also someone who has worked in the nonprofit sector for quite some time. And one of the things, and we actually wrote about this. There was a piece in the conversation with my colleagues and co-authors and my supervisors, Ryan Plummer and Darby McGrath from Vineland. And we really thought about, just from our own experiences, like really when we're thinking about low impact development or infusing green infrastructure into development, it's always an afterthought. So we often, across municipalities, across the region, we often try to fit green infrastructure after the green infrastructure sort of goes up, right? So and typically it comes down to like urban intensification. So urban intensification is we are trying to maximize gray infrastructure so we could fit the population, fit more population. But when we are thinking about like prioritizing green, we sort of plant smaller front lawns, and we don't really think about, do we leave enough space for a mature red oak to grow in this space? So a lot of the times we remove the topsoil because it's considered an obstacle for like development. So what we need to think about is going back to our roots, like putting a lot of focus on the soil and making sure the soil is intact, and working alongside developers and municipalities to try to think about low impact development and green infrastructure from the onset of a development. So and that comes back to this whole transdisciplinary collaboration among different stakeholders. And when we have that kind of communication across different stakeholders, we can make things happen and think about taking radical approaches to green infrastructure and low impact designs. And another thing I really want to say here is, one thing is this perceived cost. So we think, just imagine like going into a infrastructure that's already built and trying to infuse green in there, has stormwater protection plans, or even these really fancy like green roofs and other things. But the maintenance cost over time for replacement is quite high. But if we were to, like from the onset, we plan this already into the plans, the maintenance cost over time will be reduced, and the cost benefit of that will be much more substantial. And the other thing, as an academic scientist, we often publish in papers that are not accessible to these practitioners. So practitioners, we have to make our information available for the people who are working on the ground so they could use it. And sometimes these practitioners, they don't even know. Like I just remembered, like one of my colleagues from the Shade Policy Committee a couple days ago, she asked for the paper that I just published because it's not available to the practitioner, but she wants to cite it into her developmental like policy documents. But just making these kind of accessible research available to scientists, to other practitioners, community members, and having this kind of communication really sort of like laid out to them and working alongside with people. And that's why I'm very, very passionate about science communication, because this is how we make change happen, having impact on the environment, having an impact on ecological systems, but also having an impact for the people. So two things is, we need more radical approaches to design and making communication more accessible to the people so that community municipalities can take it, use a bottom-up approach to try to make change happen within their own region and municipalities. And that's it.
Thanks, Janani. The passion that you and Safdar and Paul all have for this subject, I love how you were brief on the challenges and you were all really enthusiastic about, you know, some of the solutions on how we overcome them. I think that's fantastic. I want to pick up on that idea of biggest challenges. And I also want to, I've been feverishly taking notes, and you know, some of the words that you used in describing the challenges that we're confronted with, subjectivity around you know, what humans prioritize, the idea of how we deal with change, this normal or new normal and this idea of radical difference. And of course, for me, a lot of these terms that you were describing really resonate right now with the global pandemic and COVID-19 that's changed the world and in my opinion, at least, has really changed the role that green infrastructure has played in our everyday daily lives. And so we're seeing that public spaces are being accessed in unprecedented numbers, and the challenges around that are probably going to carry on in the future years. So I'm curious about how you see low impact development and green infrastructure evolving in the future. So if you were to look out 5, 10, peer into that crystal ball for us, where do you see low impact development and green infrastructure going in the future? Safdar, are you comfortable kicking us off on this one?
Sure. I think that's an excellent question because this crisis that we're living through of COVID came to the world at a time when the world is less than 10 years away from a time when we can actually reverse the damage of climate change. So it's a really strong signal for human culture to kind of take a step back. I think the role of public space going forward, and especially coming out of the COVID experience, there's two really significant things that have happened. Firstly, we as a community have been able to experience what it feels like to be in really thriving public space. So I live in Greektown in Toronto, where over the summer, a really rapid enhancement of the street life was created. So cars, for the first time, got a single lane, bikes got dedicated lanes, and the in-between zone was given over to patios to rebuild their business of restaurants. So we as a community got to experience it for the first time, what it actually feels like. The second thing is that the sense of isolation that COVID has created has really created the public space that we engage with other community members in as a relief valve for us to remember what it feels like to be a member of a community, not just people who live in our own homes, and what is the value of coming together as a community. So I think those are the big lessons learned. I think if you look at the future of public space and sort of green interventions in communities, they will be continuing resistance to implement it because the auto lobby wants to have influence on how wide streets are. There's political issues involved in it. But I think what we need to look at is 3 or 4 really important lenses that need to be applied in the value we assign to public space. The first is health. And it's not just physical distancing because of COVID, but it's actually embedding healthier and active lifestyles in the lives of people. Secondly, the equity that public space brings of people who are marginalized in some way, finding ways of becoming members of the whole community and being able to contribute themselves and thrive as members of community as opposed to existing on the margins. The third one is community building and the importance of community building, what it is when we stop being isolated individuals and get the benefit and the rich experience of enjoying being part of a community. And then the last one is carbon impact. How does the intelligent design of these public spaces, whether it's through green components, adequate resource management, replenishment, and regeneration, how do those public spaces become actually learning experience for community to really thrive and understand what green impact and green development is like?
Thank you so much, Safdar. Janani, I'm curious about what you see as a future from your work and your experiences. Where do you see this all going with low impact development and green infrastructure?
So one thing that I want to reemphasize is that when we think about low impact development, we often think about stormwater reduction, infiltration. So we need to think about low impact development much differently. So low impact for the communities, low impact for ecological systems, and because everything is connected. We're all connected. We're also, human beings are part of this whole urban ecosystem. So when we are thinking about low impact development, we should think about is a low impact for the people itself and for the animals or the wild animals that are part of the system. So I think the change has to happen. So when that change happens, everything sort of will fall into place, the way we think about systems. So when we think about systems as a holistic system, that it should benefit every single living creature, animal, people, even our domestic pets. So we want to make sure they're all connected. So if we start thinking about low impact development a little differently, and nature-based solutions and green-blue infrastructure, that's only been really highlighted in the early 2000s. So we're still only 20 years in. So if we start thinking about nature-based solution and green infrastructure and blue infrastructure together for the next 20 years, and we start shifting the way we think about things, I think we will be planning with intention. When we plan urban spaces with intention, that's when we can make differences happen. And we could actually think about availability, accessibility, equity for not just people, but for the animals that are part of the system as well. So if we could think about those things differently and plan for these spaces. So let me give you an example. So during COVID, it was all populated across all main media streams in Canada with the Trinity Bellwoods example in Toronto. So I'm giving a Toronto example because that's where I'm currently reside and that's where I kind of grew up in. So the Trinity Bellwoods example is probably one of the most famous example within the last few months, where people went into a park and they were not practicing social distance. But a study by City of Toronto did state that there's about 28 meters squared of green space available for the residents. But if you think about Toronto from a landscape level, a lot of it is like all the green infrastructure is sort of on the outskirts of the city. So a lot of the population, the mass population lives in the center or the core. So these spaces are not really accessible, even though there's enough green space. So if we start planning with intention, and some of the things that Toronto do work on is like the POPs program. So having private accessible spaces for different periods of time. So if we start integrating private space, public space, and start either at the policy level or start thinking about it in terms of planning, then we can design a city or a development or even subdivisions that are low impact for like a much more holistic way.
Thanks, Janani. I see a lot of common themes between Safdar and yourself and the vision that you see for the future. And I hope the two of you haven't been colluding and ahead of our panel trying to come up with this. So Paul, what do you think, Paul? I mean, do you share some of these similar themes and where you see things going in the future, or is there something that you'd like to add that's kind of unique that, based on your experience, you think we should also pay attention to?
Thank you. No, I'm totally on side, and there is no collusion involved, believe me, because I have, as much as I'd like to talk with these folks, my panelists, co-panelists more regularly, but no, this is all something, as I say, that we live and breathe this all the time, and no matter, so many ways we could say this, Safdar and Janani, but nonetheless, we are all on the same page. And is part of where I see this evolving, Ryan, is that for the behavior change is going to be required. And we heard this theme mentioned a bunch of times. Realistically, it's going to be a gradual process. And that's so be it. You know, so I'm a fan, unfortunately, not everybody likes this. I think that the change is going to be incremental. I know a lot of people are saying we need to change now, but my experience is, and this is the saying I use all the time, is you don't jump a mountain, you climb it. Otherwise, you'll fall down and have to start again. And many times in my life, with the different things that I've done over the years, started something, it didn't get very far, and it just went away. One of the things, for example, I don't like to say, and I hope as we evolve, I don't do pilot projects. I do projects. I found in the past, if you say it's a pilot, then if it doesn't work, people say, oh, that was just a pilot and I don't care about it. And all of a sudden now we were at one point the biggest solar hot water systems country in the world, but people say it doesn't work, and now we're nowhere. So I don't use pilots. So I think as we evolve, we do projects. These are all success oriented. The way I like to look at it is I want to be on the podium when this comes to pass. So I think what's going to happen, the evolution is going to be the behavioral change is going to expand, and that incremental change will actually increase. It'll still be incremental, but the breadth of the incrementality, if that's a word, will increase. And as I pointed out earlier, our new T-shirt idea, it will become normal. And actually, the best part of this, I think, is as this evolves, it will become expected. People will say, where is my bioswale? How come I haven't got stormwater mitigation? Or where's the living wall? How come the air is not great in this building? Or there's no sunlight? It's noisy. All the different well-being elements will start to become requested and asked for. And as I say, and I think that's the part we mentioned earlier, is that it has to be start at the beginning, and it becomes the normal. The other thing I think is going to evolve, is going to change, is going to happen, and the codes are going to change. And soon we're going to see benchmarking and comparison tools are going to be far more prevalent. The ASHRAE and, pardon me for my acronyms, but ASHRAE and the Ontario Building Code. In Toronto, we've got the Toronto Green Standards. In BC, they've got the 5-step program. These are going to become more prevalent, which gives folks like us a chance to say, okay, we know how to do this. That's where the plan comes into effect. So planning, I think, is also going to evolve to the point where now we're starting to read from my world and Safdar's world. Tenders are going to come out with this as a requirement, and you are going to be evaluated on how you perform and how you predict the performance based on that. So I think that's what's going to happen is gradually people are going to start to say, well, where is this? How come I don't have that? Everybody else does. So I'm hoping that's the case, but that's what my take on it is.
Thanks, Paul, for your take on how we, I guess, navigate the current COVID challenge and move forward. And I want to just take a second as we switch gears and go to taking some questions now from the audience. Just to first of all, thank our panelists for answering some of those questions that were foremost in my mind in preparing for today. And also really, I want to, as a moderator, thank you for sticking so accurately to time. I didn't have a capacity to mute microphones with our panel today, and clearly that was a concern. So thank you all for staying absolutely perfectly to time. Now, this is always one of my favorite parts. We get questions from the audience, and so I'm going to direct those questions to our panelists. Some of them will be for one of you, some of them might be for more than one of you. And then when we get close to time, I'll invite you each to make a final statement to the audience, something you'd like to kind of leave us with. But let's take some questions from the audience. And so our first question is from Lena, and Lena's a SAS student in our Master of Sustainability program. And she asks, Safdar, I think it's just amazing what you do with living infrastructure. And she's curious if it's only engineers that work with Perkins & Will.
Engineers, in terms of building projects, are core to our sub-consultant team, but we have many other types of consultants. So energy modeling, building envelope performance, landscape design is a big part of our approach to sustainability. And cultural consultants, like we're increasingly working with Indigenous consultants to enrich our design thinking for projects. So we do have varied types of disciplines that feed into and assemble our building design teams.
Thanks so much, Safdar. Gavin poses our next question, and this one is for anyone on the panel. Actually, let me look. No, I'm sorry, Paul, this one's directed at you. So I hope your glasses don't fall off. Here we go. I have a huge affinity for the holistic approach to implementing sustainability, especially when it comes to businesses. do you think that a drive for sustainability should inform things like worker wages and their agency in decision making?
It's a really valid question. In particular, given that the UN's SDGs development goals include these kinds of considerations. And yes, I do. I do believe that, as I say, that the well-being, which includes, how people are compensated, if you will, or how people are respected, the good feelings they get. The behavioral side of working in this business, it is a people-oriented business, and so if you have happy people, effectively, and then you'll have more progress. So it's a difficult one only to quantify. In my understanding, I'm not a behavioral scientist, but my understanding is that the qualification, if you will, is critical and really important. And now, hence the rollout and the success of things like the well-being certification, and other features that the Passive House brings about, and Janani's world, the biosphere around us, all fits into that. So I do believe that that's something that's very important. I'm happy to hear Safdar's team, for example, has people that work in the behavioral side of things, and we do as well. So it's a very, very important question to bring into the mix, because it is a people-oriented solution we're looking for.
Thanks so much, Paul. This next one, I think any of you could tackle, and the questions, I can't keep up. The screen is scrolling so quickly with questions. So I'll ask for a quick response to this one, as we'll try to get a couple others on too. Actually, the screen is moving so quickly, it's scrolling, and I lost the question I was going to ask. Oh, here we go. So Allison, one of our other masters, this is good. There's so much excitement about our discussion. Allison, a Master Sustainability student, says, I'd love to hear some thoughts on why developers may be resistant to change towards low impact green infrastructure. Are most developers aware of the benefits of low impact infrastructure?
I can go first if you like. This goes back to that shift in thinking that is required. When developers start seeing green elements in their developments being a selling feature as opposed to a liability, which is happening quite rapidly, we will be in the right place. So developers work for consumers who are, depending on the type of development they're doing, they could be office users, they could be residential users. If those consumers start placing a priority on the health and wellness and low impact attributes of what they're buying from a developer, the developers will immediately pivot because they're commercially driven. But I think government has a role of policy to, and this is where municipal governments come in very heavily, as well as other levels of government, of mandating the low impact nature of developments that they are willing there, because development is a bit of a privilege that developers are allowed to buy a piece of land and develop infrastructure on it. That privilege should come with the responsibility of the impact, the resource and carbon impact of those developments that are happening. So we have a role as a consumer to demand that from developers, and we have a role to challenge our government to create policies that require developers to pay greater attention in their business platforms for green elements in their design.
I see Janani has used the hand function to grab my attention. I'm a big fan of that raised hand function. Janani, please go ahead.
No, I just want to add on to Safdar's comment about policies. So yes, developers are obviously more concerned about making sure they're getting a commercial value out of this. So a lot of the times the policies do have that ability to give developers or municipalities that leverage. And often what we see is, like, let me just talk about a tree bylaw, for example, just from an province-wide feature. So like the Municipal Act gives a lot more room in Ontario to allow a tree to flourish, but the Planning Act has loopholes where it overrides the Municipal Act. So if we could figure out ways, if we could revise some of these old existing policies to fit with changes within the different policies that are coming out, then we could sort of like uniformize, making sure that all of these are sort of in place. So sometimes what happens is different policies sort of override the other policy, and developers who are thinking about commercial values do think about using that as a loophole or leveraging. So if we provide incentives and other kind of mechanisms for developers to sort of think about putting green infrastructure, then everyone will be thinking about it in the same way. So that's something that going forward, we have to think about that. We obviously want to work with the developers and municipalities to make green infrastructure sort of like almost a mandatory thing within new subdivisions.
Thanks so much, Janani. I want to interject for 10 seconds, and I want to ask our panelists if you'd be open for us extending this by a little while, and not an overly long time, but if we could extend it by maybe 10-ish minutes. I just have 3 more questions I'd love to get to briefly, and then some final thoughts. Is thumbs up? Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So the questions are flying in. Darby asks, for Paul or Safdar, where are the gaps in the evidence base for design that you see as limiting the efficiency of green-blue infrastructure?
Well, I'll start, I guess. That's a great question. Gap analysis is a great way to think in general. The gaps it's a good one because it's spotty right now in the fact that some developers take this on wholeheartedly and they go at it and they're going with it. And what's the saying? The people who go looking for rivers catch the arrows, and the people who follow get the land, or something along those lines. But that's the early adopters are the ones that are figuring out where the gaps could be. Even the gaps, in my mind, there's a couple of things. One is, and Brock is taking this on with your institute here, is education and training and getting the people out there saying, well, why are we doing this? So there's the gap there, is just the application versus studies and reports and things of that nature. My comment earlier about having a plan. When we put together a plan, it's to be implemented, not studied. So I think that's one of the gaps, is really getting the experience and the education up there, and also to get any case studies, and people should be out there communicating these success stories. And I'm sure Safdar does this all the time with their company. I'm sure they have lots of case studies. Well, that has to become a little bit more prevalent somehow. But I think that's one of the gaps. The technology gaps, we can overcome those. That's all application based, and that's not something that's really a difficult problem. It's really getting people to believe it and getting to accept it. Like my saying is, to get people to go from why should I to why aren't I. I think that's the big gap.
So if I understand the question correctly, there was the word evidence used, and I would say that we as a design profession who designs buildings are guilty of not doing enough to collect data and document research that provides evidence to owners when they initiate building projects, to have a basis for understanding what they can expect from the investment they're making. So that is our shortfall, I would say. But the other thing in looking at evidence is the lifespan of the era when owners of development projects have seriously started considering investing in green components of design is not very old. And so the lifespan in which we can collect that data. So when I work with clients and we try and inspire them to allocate adequate funds for having an impactful element of low impact design, the first question is, well, what's the return on this investment? And so the return on the investment, if you spread it over 3, 5, 10, 15 years, requires us to have evidence about how a certain green investment in a building has played itself out. over 3, 5, 10, 15 years. And that would be the basis that we can go to the client with to say, if you take on this first cost, this is the benefit you will receive. But that also goes back to the sort of ethical components, which is not in dollars. For instance, a university like Brock University, who is a leader in your community for learning and inspiring people to learn about what are the greatest challenges of our time, there has to be an ethical and a philosophical basis for that first cost to be supported, not just a return on investment. Because if we leave everything to nuts and bolts and dollars, where is the human intervention in there? Where's the intelligence that we can bring to the qualitative aspects or the philosophical reasons for us to commit to certain things that may not show the automatic and immediate return on investment?
Thanks so much, Safdar. Next question is from Ryan Stewart. He was previously at facilities management at Brock, and he shares that he totally agrees, Paul, with yourself, that sustainability needs to be built into the tender and procurement process. But in his experience, he finds that there's times that are value engineered out to save on costs. I didn't know what that term means, but obviously you do. Out to save on costs, and he asks, are there strategies you use to avoid this parsing out of sustainability type measures?
It's funny. Sorry, I'll just answer really quick. It's funny that would come up. I just wrote that note down here. In fact, I put down in short form VE. Value engineering happens all the time. Safdar, I'm sure you're more than familiar with that concept. How do we get around that? You have to start at the very beginning, and this whole integrative process, integrated design process that we're talking about in low impact designing, it has to be baked into the process. It's not for discussion. Effectively, it's like putting on a roof. You have to have a roof. So yes, you have to have these measures. That's one point. Second point is, one of the problems I found in the shortcomings with projects is that at the very early stages, they are costed out. They're costed by somebody, and they say this building is a $50 million building, and the renewable or sustainable elements had really not been considered, or if they had, I think one of our panelists mentioned earlier, it's an afterthought. And they say, and then it becomes value engineers out to save money, when in fact it wasn't budgeted properly in the first place. And this is the big pain for me as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't a $50 million building, it's a $55 million building. Start there. That's what it costs. Why everybody gets upset about $70 jeans? That's what they cost. You know what I mean? So that's my take on it. It has to be started at the beginning, properly budgeted, and then VE doesn't become a problem.
So I would completely agree with
Paul.
I would agree with Paul. I think the unrealistic allocation of budget to achieving higher levels of performance, for instance, in buildings, speaking to the audience member's question who is coming from a facilities perspective, we worked on a university building with a university that I will not name, who set initially a goal for a net zero design of the building. When the building estimates were developed in the early stages, and net zero was actually identified as a separate cost item, that's where the mistake happened. Because the sponsors of the building, which was a certain faculty who was paying for the building, said, I don't want to pay for that. Why should I pay for that? That's the university's problem. If they want to pay for net zero, they should come up with the money for it. Well, that divide cannot exist. So firstly, yes, you have to have realistic budgets. And secondly, the commitment to that value needs to be maintained. And we're still living in the world where campus buildings fight over, am I going to get that additional office, or am I going to give up that rainwater cistern? And the answer is no, I want my office, not the rainwater cistern. So as long as we maintain that unrealistic duality without serious institutional commitment that ensures that what is essential for all buildings as major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions needs to be maintained at all costs, we're going to keep running into what the question is about. Value engineering is going to consider green components of building design as optional, not must-haves.
Thanks so much, Safdar. I recognize that we're doing our best to get to all the questions, and I apologize. There's a few that we won't be able to, but I'm very cognizant also of time and wanting to not go past kind of 10 after. So Janani, I have a quick question for you, and then a question to end with all three of you on. So first of all, Janani, this one comes to us from Jillian, who's a student in our Master of Sustainabilities program. And she agrees that we need to improve the accessibility of significant information and LID and green infrastructure to the community and key practitioners. What do you think is the most effective method to improve our communication?
So as scientists, if we are open to publishing in trade journals, those are more accessible to practitioners. Often up-and-coming scientists, we like to reach out for journals that are have a higher impact in the academic world. But I think what also can be useful is social media. Like, I pretty much tweet out every single thing that I'm working on, or even any substantial results, or even papers that I've been working on. So if we could use social media and other communication tools for good, and have those kind of information available to the community, that would be a first start. I think that's not where we should stop. We should actually be more engaged with collaborating with practitioners, not just scientists itself. Like, for example, with the partnership with Town of Lincoln and Vineland Research and Innovation, we are working alongside developers and planners and municipal representatives from the Town of Lincoln. So we're working alongside them. So we are constantly engaging in knowledge share and information transfer. So if we are able to do those kind of projects, and as academic scientists, we're more open to inviting practitioners into our work, I think that allows for that sort of like holistic way of thinking. And that's also not just transdisciplinary research, but I like to think of it as transdisciplinary collaboration. So those are important aspects that we could invite into our work, but also somehow having those, like being open to speaking to media, speaking to writing a blog post that are more available to the general public. Those are aspects that you could work on. So definitely communication needs help here, but if we are constantly engaged in science communication and also be open-minded to accepting information and feedback from people who are actually doing the work on the ground, I think a lot of this can be solved. Yes, Safdar.
Just wanted to add that the transmission of information into the community, which is the non-scientific community, the general community, is like any change you're trying to achieve. Any change needs advocates and allies. So I think the identification of people in the community who are committed allies of positive change related to sustainability, they need to be brought into the picture, and they need to be made allies. The other thing is the power of storytelling and the successes that those individuals or organizations achieve as a result of committing to climate positive investments. What are those stories? They need to be shared with the wider community so people are able to understand in an easy and simple manner what are the benefits of doing the right thing. So those are just two components I wanted to add. Did we lose Janani? I think we did.
I think we did, but we'll take that as a connection issue, and I'm sure she'll be back momentarily.
She'll come back, yeah.
In the meantime, and I just wanted to again apologize to audience members that we're not able to get to all the questions, but I just wanted to plant a seed of an idea for one of our from one of our students because I thought this was a brilliant question, and I think you should all think about it. And I wish Janani was here with us, but Savannah, one of our Master of Sustainability students, posed the question to say, if the three of you were to actually think about working together on a transdisciplinary project, what would that be, and what would it look like? And I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you that, and I know we're at time, but I really wanted to plant that seed, because that's the spirit that we're here in today, to get you thinking about it. And I think, there's some really interesting opportunities ahead of us. So as I promised, just as we're at time, I want to give each of you a very, very brief moment to kind of leave one pearl of wisdom, as it were, with our audience. And then I just want to wrap things up by saying thank you. So Safdar, do you want to just leave the audience with one
Sure.
kind of thing that they're going to remember?
Absolutely. I want to address the students in the audience specifically. And my message to you is that while there is a lot of doom and gloom about the state of the climate and the planet, we're also in a highly privileged position to have unprecedented levels of knowledge and science that can help us solve the problem. So I'd like all of you to think of yourselves as healers of this problem and healers of the earth, who are empowered as you're building your careers to actually have impact for yourselves and your future generations to reverse what we've done to the world. So think of it optimistically and in an empowered way. And keep that in mind as you continue your journey on learning about this important topic.
Thank you, Safdar, so much. Welcome back, Janani.
I am so sorry.
No, don't be at all. We're happy to have you back, and we're just asking each of the panelists to give a quick 30-second last pearl of wisdom to our audience. So while you're thinking of what you want to say, Paul, go ahead, please.
Thanks very much. First of all, thanks for having this again, and I'm really happy to hear that there are so many people attending this. And I think that leads me to my pearl of wisdom, if you will, is that this, I think, is a great path to be on. And there'll always be speed bumps. There's always going to be people that you'll run into that don't believe you or don't like what you're doing. That's just the nature of humanity. But I honestly believe, and I've been doing it for a while, and we all have, and we all will, that to stick to your guns, realize that the aspects of this are people-based, and technology and application, and thinking like a person is going to do you in good stead. So hang on, and good luck to everybody.
Much, Paul. Janani, what would you like to leave the audience today with?
I hope you will take some of this information with you that we talked about in your daily lives, in how you are approaching green infrastructure, low impact development. And for those of students who are logged into this today, maybe if you are working in this area, you are the future leaders of sustainability and low impact development designs and green infrastructure designs. So really stick with, going back to what Paul said, stick with your gut feeling on what you want to do, and prioritize your values, and take that into your professional work, and that will guide you where you want to be.
Great. Safdar, Paul, Janani, my sincere thanks as a director of the Environmental Sustainability Research Center for participating in our panel discussion today. Dr. Marilyn Jolino, the instructor for our transdisciplinary seminar, SAS 5P04 class, would like to also convey her sincere appreciation for your participation in our class today. It's been invaluable for our students to be able to hear your wealth of experience and your varied perspectives on these very important issues that I know we're talking about and we're confronting in real time. And I also want to convey, I know you can't see it on your screen because of our platform, but the appreciation and thanks from our students, from staff, faculty, as well as community members that is rolling in, that I can see. They really appreciated your honesty, your forthrightness, and the genuine authenticity you brought today to our panel. And it's that reflection and that sense of community, I think, that really makes us all feel comfortable as people that are passionate about sustainability to have these kind of important discussions. So my thanks from Marilyn, and also thanks from everyone on the call for joining us today. And we hope to have you back sometime soon.
Thank you very much for inviting us. It's been an honor for us. All the best to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.